I'm Charlie. I come from investment banking and I help enterprise to cut their CAC, increase their margin, and scale profitably. Over the last episode, we covered the key business KPI, the strengths of qualitative survey, how important is brand, and how to measure it. And today we're going to talk more specifically about brand search queries, how to measure the drivers, and how the Google algorithm work. Two main mistakes that I see happening all the time is one, attributing all SEO traffic to SEO. This is not true because a lot of the SEO is actually branded query. So that means that people see it on social media, they type the name of the company on Google, and then they go on your organic link. A lot of reports using tracking, for example, would just attribute it to SEO, but it's completely incorrect. The other things I see a lot is people spending too much on the brand search queries. So bidding on keywords that include your company name. Now, there is a little rationale to have a bit of spend in it. We're covering that later when I'll explain how the Google algorithm works. But in 90% of the cases, people are overspending there. And what they do is that actually cannibalizing organic traffic with Google paid. And so what's happening is that actually increase the customer acquisition costs, reduce the margin, and this is a pain point if you want to scale profitably. So the first thing that is important to say is that real organic SEO traffic is drying out. There's no discussion about this. Like all the reports I see reach the same conclusion. The users have changed drastically the way they look for information. So for example, social media, Instagram, TikTok, Reddit, all of those are becoming the new search engines. You have Google who also have their Google AI overview. When you search for something, you have the Google AI overview answering to your questions already, and that's really killing real SEO organic. There's very little real organic search queries that are landing to your SEO. I give an example here of a company I'm helping. As you can see on the impression side, well, they have their brand queries do drive about, I would say, 50% of impressions. But when you look at the clicks, only the brand queries go through. So they have a 99% brand queries, and that's the SEO traffic, and 99% of the traffic is branded query. So mentioning the website, and that demand is created from elsewhere. It's not thanks to SEO, your beautiful website, your blogs on SEO. It's none of that. So a thing that I see very often is that top of funnel teams do the heavy lift, and then you have the search engines who get credit. So here's like, it's a little cartoon I created a couple of years ago, is that top of funnel teams do the heavy lift and then the bottom of the funnel team get the credit. So here we have an example where social media manager is a bit worried because the management said that we are unable to track the performance of what they do. And then the colleague suggests to concentrate more on search engine. And then the social media manager answers, where do you think the traffic's coming from? And then the person recommending search engine says, oh, it's you, thank you very much. Because you have the person doing the heavy lift, doing the awareness through social media, through PR, etc. And then you have the search engine person who got amazing results thanks to the first person who got none of the credit. And that is happening all the time. So brand search is not incremental. That is something I want to point out. That's a great incrementality benchmark I use a lot. And in red, you see the brand search and you have the PMax with brand search. So not incremental, it means that it doesn't drive additional value. So what it does is just increase your customer acquisition cost and reduce your margin. And in addition to brand search, obviously, and PMax with brand queries, you also have retargeting or affiliates. All of those tend to actually increase the customer acquisition cost rather than increasing the revenue. But they always look great on a multi-touch attribution, and which is why people keep piling on it. So how can you track your branded search queries? So if you have campaigns in Google Ads targeting those keywords, you need to merge the two together. So the first thing I suggest you to do is you have to create a project in the Google console and then connect your Google Search Console with your Google Cloud project through BigQuery, and then you're going to store all your Google search data there. The reason is because the BigQuery solution is the only one that has all the data. All the other source of information, like the UI, like the API, Everything is sampled now. So if you want to have all the data, the BigQuery solution is the only ones that remain. It's actually quite easy to do. I have a next slide on this. And then you have to merge the data with the Google Ads data. And when you add the clicks on both sides, you'll have the total number of branded clicks that land on your website. So it's very easy to connect your Google Search Console with BigQuery. One, it's actually free. And then even when you start to get into the threshold of not free, you have $300 to start with. And because we're talking about BigQuery, storage is very cheap. $300 can get you a very, very long way. And so what you have to do is that you have to go on your Google Search Console, you go into the setting and you click on bulk data export. And then what you're going to do is that you have a review instruction, which is very clear also. And then you're just going to add your Google Cloud project ID and your dataset name. So the Google Cloud Project ID will be the ID of the Google Cloud project you create in Google Cloud. And then you add your dataset name and then you click continue. And after 24 hours, you start to see the data getting in. So the thing is, it's not backfilling. So you won't have any history. You're only going to have the data since you started. This is why it's important to start as fast as possible. And once you start to look to the difference of BigQuery, this is what you see in the UI. You'll see difference and it's normal. And the reason, as I explained, is that what you see in the UI is sampled and what you see in BigQuery is not. Once you have the total amount of brand clicks, Google Ads, Google Search Console, you can start to play with this to understand what is driving those clicks. So one thing you can do, for example, if you're posting on social media, is that you can look for relationship between moment you post and you don't post. And here we had like a very clear example. It's a bit dating now, but we had a company that were doing a lot of LinkedIn. They stopped because they really didn't understand the impact of it. But when you do look at those branded queries, you see a very big difference between the moment they were actually posting on LinkedIn and the moment they were not anymore. And it's there because it's the whole team was posting almost daily. And then they stop, and then you can really see the difference. And so that is not really difficult to do. And this comes into the bucket of leading indicator that we discussed a few episodes ago. It's like the importance of lagging and leading indicator. So obviously what you want to do is that you want to confirm the leading into a lag indicator. So a great way to do that is self-attribution later on to understand the real impact of LinkedIn. The reason why self-attribution is because often people will come to a social source, they will look at the website, they'll buy or subscribe later. And that's even more the case when we're talking about higher price services. So one thing you can do is that you can also do a first brand budget incrementality setup. So a very simple one, it's very easy. So you have here, for example, that's an example I provided a couple of years ago. So we have the total of brand search click and SEO brand clicks. And then you see that it's demo data, but you see that it starts like 50 on paid, 50 on organic. And then we turn off brand paid search and we saw that then we ended up with 80 clicks in total, but we lost 20 total clicks. But in the end, it also means that the brand paid search was cannibalizing 30 clicks a day. And so here in the example, what you can see is that when you do the math is that while on the platform, you see a cost per click of brand search, a brand search of 10, the real value was actually 25 because we could have had clicks that we didn't need to pay for. And then we have the more robust approach, which is the geo test. So what you do is that you get all of your, you can get your revenue or your brand search clicks or anything. You can get your target by DMA, designated market area. Then you can use a Google Match Market library, which is a Python code to create a split. And then you can start to run some tests on this. This can be like turn off paid brand search. It can be running a top of funnel initiative to see the increase in clicks. But yes, the target of what you want to see is not necessarily revenue. Revenue is always better. But the problem that you have to know, and it's very important, is that incrementality has a very short-term vision because the incrementality test will only capture the people who are doing something within that window. An incrementality test is often 4 weeks. So it has a very narrow vision. So obviously it doesn't fit with revenue. There's a lot of long-term impact that you're not going to capture. But one thing that is extremely important is that many mobile brand search will fall into direct And the reason is because when you use your phone is auto-filling the email address. And so that goes straight into direct. But that's actually a brand search query, but that doesn't go through Google. And so when you want to really understand the impact of traffic of your top of funnel campaigns, you also have to look at direct. What you can also do to understand where your brand search are coming from is that you can do an upper funnel MMM. So MMM is great for short-term vision. The reason is because you have the signal, and then the signal goes down, and then you have the noise. And imagine the noise as waves. At some point, the signals will go under the waves, and then you won't be able to really assess what is the real impact. So when you work with shorter term impact, like brand search queries, for example, those models tend to be very good because we are looking on a much shorter time frame rather than revenue, for example, which can happen much later. And that's where MMM struggles. And so what you can do is that you can get your multiple initiatives, the spend of your different initiatives, run an MMM with a target as brand search, for example, and you can understand what is driving those brand search queries. Now, why is it so important to understand what the brand search query is? So I use it a lot. So if you look at your GA data, you're going to see that the most profitable channels are direct, SEO, brand search. And the reason is because all of those are people coming back to your website to buy or to subscribe a demo because they know your website already. And so those channels are way more valuable. And so what you want to do is that you want to maximize the traffic to those channels. By running those top of funnel MMM, you're able to understand what initiatives actually driving people to come back and buy through those channels. It's actually a solution to the weaknesses of multi-touch attribution, because the intent of multi-touch attribution is being able to track that social media and then that direct and then that brand search and then the purchase. The reality is that those knowledge graphs do not really work. It's very imperfect. It only tracks really the bottom of the funnel, not what created demand initially, but that MMM style, for example, or looking into what drives direct, SEO, brand search can actually solve that MTA issue. So the brand defense myth. So we always hear that, oh, you need to spend on brand search to protect your brand. So in reality, yes, but also most of you are spending way too much money on that. And I wanted to explain a bit how the Google algorithm works. So here we have an example. So you see that the advertiser 1 has a max bid of 2, quality score 10, ad rank of 20. So that person is on the top. So the ad rank is actually the max bid times the quality score. And as you can see is that even if your max bid is the most, like for example, $8 for the advertiser 4, if you have a quality score of 1, you have the highest CPC and your ad rank is always lower. So that means that it's not because you're spending more that you're going to be on top. And what defines that quality score is relevancy, keyword, click-through rate. So when you think about it, imagine a person typing your company name in the search engine and you have a competitor bidding on this. Where do you think that user is more likely to click? Your website. So you have higher CTR. Which one do you think has the highest relevancy? You, because your keyword is your brand search. And so also the historical performance. Which one do you think is going to have the historical performance? Again, you. So you're always going to have a much higher quality score than your competitor, which means that on the ad rank side, even with a much smaller max CPC than your competitor, you're always more likely to be above, but also have a much smaller CPC. So it's actually very expensive for a competitor to bid on your brand and very difficult to prove that it's profitable. I have very rarely saw it. But that system only works if you bid on your keyword, because if you don't participate to the auction, you won't be able to push the CPC of your competitor higher. So that's the reason why you actually have to spend on brand search, but just enough to be able to outbid your competitors. Because obviously, as you can see, how it works is that the actual CPC here, you see for the first one is 16 divided by 10. So it is actually the ad rank of the second advertiser divided by the quality score. So important to say is that yes, we overspend on brand search, but this is the reason why it's important also to invest in brand search. The last important part I almost left out is that you can actually see who's bidding on your branded keywords, as long as you have paid brand search campaign in place. So if you use the auction insight and you pick your brand campaign, you'll be able to see what other competitors are overlapping with your brand keyword. And it's super interesting because what I also like to use is that I like to use monthly data to see if there is a trend. And you can see if specific competitors are increasing their spend on your brand in terms of they're reducing. If you also sell your product on Amazon, it's also interesting to see how much Amazon is bidding on your key terms. And here we have an example. For example, the first is you have you. So you is saying what are your metrics. So you have the impression share, which is the number of impressions you got from those queries. I'm not a complete big fan of this metric because it also counts impression at the bottom of the page where nobody goes. So what I like to use instead is the top impression share. You also have the overlap rate. So often the competitor ad is appearing at the same time than yours. Then the position above rate. So how many times your competitor ends up higher than you on your own brand keywords. And then the top of page reach, which is a metric I much more prefer because it really looks at everything that is above the organic result. And so here, for example, it says how many times a competitor is also above the organic content. So in the 3 first ads that you can see on Google. So for example, here we see that the competitor 1 is usually there to 70% of the time. So we know that that competitor is really bidding on the term quite aggressively. And then you have the absolute top page rate. So who's the first one? So obviously here, as I explained earlier, Google promotes relevancy. And so if it's your own keywords, Google will negatively impact the other bidders, and the other bidders will have to pay a lot more money to be on the top of the page. So it's quite normal to see you still winning most of the keywords. But as you can see is that the competitor 1 is still willing to push and be 30% of the time higher than yourself. And I like to look at monthly data, as I explained, because you can see the whole trend. So this is when you start to see drop in performance in your brand search keyword, but also in SEO. This table in Google is very, very interesting to look into. I hope you enjoyed this video. Next time we're going to talk about the way we can measure our marketing initiatives and the pros and cons of each. See you next time.